So back in September of 2018, Nintendo Switch Online was launched on the Nintendo Switch console, initially with support for things like the NES library of games, online play with friends, and various different save data cloud features. And in today's video, I want to take an objective look at where the service is at today, what are the new enhancements that Nintendo has added over the course of time, and break down the current state of Nintendo Switch Online in 2022. What's up, Nation? If it's your first time on the channel, make sure you join Sunbro Nation by subscribing below, hit the like button on this video if you enjoy it today, and make sure you turn on your bell notification icon so you're kept up to date with all the newest gaming news. As I mentioned, guys, today we are going to take an objective look at Nintendo Switch Online because, to be fair, it has been quite some time since the service was originally launched, and it has definitely gone through its fair share of transformations over the years, as well as new console offerings. As we mentioned at the start of the video, when the service was launched back in September of 2018, the only classic library of games that we had access to was none other than the NES library of games, and we will start the topic there around the current support of what is available on NES, because if you are somebody who's either already subscribed to this service right now and maybe it's just the base tier, or you want to sign up, there are two distinctive differences on whether or not you are going to go with something like the base tier service or the expansion pack, and we will do our best to break down the differences in value in those services. Because if you just look at the library of games, and let's say you don't have things like the NES mini console where a lot of these games were supported as playable titles, it's not the easiest thing to hook up an original NES to modern TVs anymore and experience some of these classics. And while you can argue that support has definitely gotten less and less consistent in terms of quality titles for things like the NES and SNES library of games, I do think that there are definitely some standout ones that if you haven't gone back and given them time, you should. And while we still are missing some fan classics in the current library lineup, I do think that there's still a lot to be said here, and we have to start off and highlight, obviously, the big ones like your Legend of Zelda, which that is the first original Zelda game. If you want to know why it got continued support from Nintendo with numerous iterations and is still one of their mainline franchises today, it is really cool to go back and see essentially the first game that ever really dropped you into a open world where you just have to figure out what to do and have numerous puzzles and dungeons and very cool gameplay elements to experience. I do think that it's one that if you're just a hardcore fan of the series now, is worth going through and seeing what created and put that series forward on its right foot. Now, you also have things like the classic Mario library of games with the original Super Mario Bros. Super Mario Bros. 3, which is arguably one of the best of all time for Mario. However, I would argue if you're going to sign up for this service as a base tier subscriber to experience these games as the Super Mario All-Stars collection as opposed to their original releases on the NES, unless if you just have nostalgia for that particular version of the game, you have various other games that you can see on screen here, such as the original Donkey Kong. NES was Nintendo's first true home console, so of course, if you want to see where some of your favorite franchises that you probably remember nowadays originated, this is the console to hop into and check out. You will also notice certain things like the SP edition of games. These essentially are a special mode of the game that will allow you to play sometimes towards the very end of the game. Like for instance, in Metroid's version, the SP version, you essentially start off towards the end in the battle with Ridley with your ice beam and everything intact and ready to go, and that's it's a curated experience for a game that I guess I never really mess with these at all. I don't know if a lot of people do, but when the SP editions are added in, it never really gets a second look for me. But for certain games that you're just a mega fan of, it might be worth checking those SP editions out. You have also standout titles like Ninja Gaiden games. If you like action and 2D platforming at the same time with just intense enemies on screen and honestly some next level difficulty, this is one to go back and look at. Zelda 2 Adventure of Link, arguably the worst Zelda game ever released in the franchise. They definitely tried something different with that one and never revisited that side-scrolling Link combat formula, but I do think that it's still an interesting title in history to go back and look at. The original Kid Icarus that we don't see love for today and haven't since the 3DS era, at least they gave him another shot. I am hopeful that we will see him brought back to the Switch in the future. And then you have the original Super Mario Bros. 2 or Mario Bros. The Lost Levels, arguably the hardest 2D Mario game. Maybe you could say Super Mario Bros. 3 stands up in difficulty towards the end of the game to that as well, but I do think that these classic library of games are worth going back and checking out. Now, over recent times, if you start to get up the list here, you definitely notice that outside of games like Earthbound Beginnings, which was a big surprise that Nintendo brought that over, you do kind of see the quality, you start to essentially go off of a cliff. And that's really where you have to have the reality check in 2022. We have games like Pinball being added into the service, and Dig Dug actually being one that's, I guess, better on the list than a lot of the other ones have recently. But you do have kind of these more bottom of the barrel, no-name games, or maybe there's a hidden gem in there here and there, but not the titles that people are asking for. And there has absolutely been a drop off with quality when we look at things like the NES and SNES library, because it sounds like Nintendo, by all accounts, doesn't really want to pay the licensing fees probably required to support some of the deeper cuts and missing fan classics that still remain to be seen. Now, you then have to quickly highlight the SNES library of games, arguably one of my favorite Nintendo consoles of all time, maybe next to the GameCube, N64. It's hard to say what my favorite console is, but definitely still one of my favorite controllers out there, as whenever I want to play a retro game, I normally use the wireless SNES controller to do so, as long as it has an accurate button layout. And you just immediately see the heavy hitters like your A Link to the Past, really one of the best Zeldas in history, period. Even if you are a fan of the 3D formula that went along with Ocarina of Time and forward, this was the one that I would argue is the first full budget, full-fledged attempt at a Zelda title, and really one that put it on the map for many different gamers. You have Super Metroid, you have Super Mario World 2, Yoshi's Island, the original Super Mario World, which is one of my favorite 2D platformers of all time, Star Fox, Super Mario Kart, you have Kirby's Dream Land. Kirby's been getting a ton of love recently. Super Ghouls and Ghosts, a fantastic 2D action platformer that many fans need to check out. Star Fox 2, that didn't actually originally see a full-on release, now brought back because apparently it was done and then something happened with the game. I don't know the full history behind it, but we didn't have Star Fox 2 back in the day released, and now we can actually play it as part of the service. The original F-Zero. So many classic Super Nintendo games if you look on here. Don't even get me started on Donkey Kong Country, because my love for that franchise is just next level, and 1 through 3, and really 1 and 2, and probably 2, arguably in my opinion, being the standout best 2D platformer of all time, period. I will say it, that's what I think in my personal opinion. Super Mario All-Stars, another one that, as I mentioned, if you want to go experience those classic Mario games, play that version. That's the definitive way to play them in my personal opinion. But you then, as we get again towards the top end of the list, you will start to see less familiar titles. Earthbound, another one to point out and focus on, because fans were asking for that title for so long, and Nintendo finally stepped up and revealed it at a Nintendo Direct, and it is now on the service. And there are many other SNES games that we need to see added in, such as your Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars, and many different licensed games that I want to see added into the service going forward. But we do at least get things like continued support. Now, when you round out the conversation of the base tier, you have to keep in mind that the 2 libraries we just went through is what you will be getting with the base tier, as well as online functionality. And while it's been mostly positive in the tone so far, the online functionality, to be transparent with Nintendo in today's day and age, is very lackluster and leaves a lot to be desired, such as lack of things like chat rooms, that being both on the voice and text chat fronts. Like, yes, they have their smartphone app that nobody has downloaded and nobody uses. You should have on-platform ability to send messages to your buddies, as well as on-console voice chat support that you can do without having to need any third-party application. It's just a core basic expectation in 2022, and for all intents and purposes, Nintendo is just behind the times when it comes to their broader conversation of online features when you just objectively compare them to the competition. And outside of things like save data cloud support, that's where the benefits essentially run out for the base tier service. Now, if you are somebody who's willing to go up to the $50 annual price point, I would recommend doing the family plan and splitting it with some friends or family. That will be the most cost-effective way to do it. but that is something that you will be in a new pricing tier at that point, because the base tier service comes in at $20 annually, and you go all the way up to $50 for the expansion pack. But then we get things like new console support, Sega Genesis being notable out of the gate with a wide library of games that you can see here on screen. Gunstar Heroes, don't sleep on that. Definitely fantastic 2D shooter that, you know, with online support in the modern era, you can co-op and play through with a friend. Definitely fantastic library of Sega games. In my opinion, so far, we normally see between 3 and 5 games drop into the service at any given time, and it seems to be on every couple months of a schedule, roughly speaking, right now. So the continued support for the Genesis library is very positive in my opinion, even most recently getting Mega Man The Wily Wars, which is a collection of Mega Man 1 through 3, but essentially remade the same way as your Super Mario All-Star style games being added in recently. And I am hopeful for the future continued support for Genesis, because you have to keep in mind that when we start to talk expansion pack, we are also talking about online play being supported in these games, which of course is available with some of the previous titles we talked about. But when you talk about things like the Genesis library, and then even more so on the N64 library of games, that was when gaming really started to come into that more of a multiplayer focused aspect, especially with the N64 having 4 controller ports for the first time on a Nintendo home console, and that being a very big focus of that particular library. Now, the N64 library of games is one we have to spend a little bit of time on, because it is actually Nintendo's focal point for the service right now. I think you could argue for the expansion pack, as we are seeing continued support for 1 new added game per month at this point in time. Hopefully that doesn't get more sporadic over the course of time. Nintendo has confirmed that past their announced roadmap of games that we've known up to this point in time, they will continue to add more N64 titles in the future, which is definitely a nice confirmation to have directly from them themselves. And you have already a standout library of games. You may remember, so this was initially launched in October of 2021 with the expansion pack offerings, and I was originally pretty harsh and negative on the N64 quality of games, because they had certain emulation issues that could just not be looked past. You had Ocarina of Time straight up not able to render the original look of the game that you would remember, with things like reflections, fog missing, and noticeable input delay. And to Nintendo's credit, slowly over the course of time, with addition of new games, they have actually tweaked the emulation and the emulator that runs these games at its core to essentially fix those problems. And by all accounts, these all are now great ways to play and go back and experience these N64 classic games. And that was something that if I was making this game shortly after the service launched, I could not confidently say. And I'm definitely glad that Nintendo has put in the work that they needed to actually make these games fully enjoyable, just the way you remember them. No weird dark filter like we saw in the Wii U era of Virtual Console, and just a banger library of games so far. You can argue that it might be interesting to see where the roadmap goes from here, and Nintendo could either go the route of spending some money, paying some licensing fees, getting many more of the rare games, such as so far we just have Banjo-Kazooie, but how far do they go into their library of rare games that actually made some of the most quality N64 games period in that point in time, to be fair. And so I do think you can safely say that the biggest draw for you potentially upgrading to the expansion pack is the N64 library of games, Pokemon Puzzle League being the most recent addition, which is one that I don't have nostalgia for, and it's behind my camera here, so you probably can't see it. Outside of everything else, outside of that particular title though, you can see everything else on screen, and how many of these games have super enjoyable multiplayer in addition to a lengthy single player. And so it might be worth it, just for what you see here today, to upgrade to the expansion pack. However, we are also expecting things like additional systems to be added in the future, hopefully like your Game Boy family of systems, as we know those emulators are being worked on right now. And I think at that point in time on the service, it becomes an absolute no-brainer if Nintendo does not do an additional price hike, and we actually have a new family of systems all getting revolving doors of new games being added in every month. I definitely think that that is going to be a sweet spot for the service in the future. And if you're someone who's on the fence and maybe still not totally sold on the expansion pack, the only other big selling point for the service right now is its multiple DLC packs, such as Animal Crossing New Horizons. Recently, we got the addition of the Splatoon 2 DLC, and the biggest ongoing sell, I would argue, for the service when it comes to the DLC pack side of things is the Mario Kart 8 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass. That, of course, has 6 full waves planned out, one of which is already live on the service. Wave 2 should be dropped and announced at any point in time whenever Nintendo finally decides to do that, and we will actually be carrying that game all the way through the end of 2023 with an active roadmap of new tracks and courses being added in. That clearly was a pivot for Nintendo because of how massively successful the title sold, with 40+ million copies out there. But I would absolutely say that Nintendo Switch Online has definitively come a long way in 2022 and is a much more complete service now than it was when we were initially talking about it, with things like the expansion pack original launch and with the misstepped roadmap that they've done over the course of time, such as going 6 months without adding any kind of new NES and SNES games. You can argue that yes, the support is dwindling for those classic libraries, and that probably just means it is time, hopefully at the September Nintendo Direct, when they have historically updated the service and made big announcements in additions for it, that we can see some kind of new family of consoles in addition to just more continued great N64 game support. So at this point in the video, guys, I want to hear from you personally on all your thoughts and opinions on Nintendo Switch Online, where it stands today in 2022, and the enhancements that Nintendo has continued to make to the service. If you're someone who's not subscribed, do you feel like it is worth it at its current price point of $50 annually for the expansion and $20 for the base tier? Or are you somebody who is going to remain on the sidelines and not choose to actually hop into the service right now currently because of the state of everything? And if you are somebody who's not subscribed, what is it going to take for Nintendo to actually make the service worth it in your mind to sign up and become a happy paying subscriber? So regardless of your thoughts and feelings on everything we talked about today, I do look forward to hearing from you all in the comments down below before you leave the video, as I do look forward to getting a back and forth conversation started with you all around this topic. Go watch the weekend video next if you haven't already, where we take a deeper look at the GoldenEye 007 remaster situation and boot up the last attempt of a remaster of this classic title. Also, make sure you like, subscribe, turn on your notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.